So the first time you are faced with the Noble Eightfold Path, the variety of terms in it might run together, and it might be quite difficult to figure out, well, in what way is speech different from action, is different from livelihood? Um, why would they divide it up that way? So I want to just try to give you my pitch on the shape of this, the distinctions between those terms, and I hope it helps make some sense. And as well, that we can come to appreciate the holistic depth of this path. It's pretty interesting. If you're at all working on the intersections of philosophy, anthropology, psychology, sociology, how about gut sciences, right? Any of those things, you're going to see that this path addresses a very holistic approach to the religious human. All right, so here's our handy little diagram. I thought it was kind of colorful and useful for our purposes. And in many ways, here we see that there's a number one, and yet also we read that these are not understood as one takes you to two, takes you to three, right? That there is an interconnection between these. These are more webbed practices than they are chronological practices. And yet there is a logic and a reason for the listing as it comes. So the first, if we think of it as a three-legged stool, the path to enlightenment rests on these three areas of a kind of consciousness. So wisdom, morality, and concentration. That in and of itself, if you think to yourself, what is my understanding of a human's comportment in the world? Would I divide it into their wisdom, their morality, and their ability to concentrate? This is maybe a little bit different than what we're used to thinking about. Right, so wisdom. His point on wisdom, and wisdom being the first piece of this, is that unless you're compelled by the argument that desire causes our internal suffering, you won't begin the path or maintain your balance on the path. So there is a first three, he understands the power of the first three noble truths as being fundamental for starting onto this path. If you don't buy the ideas of desire being a cause of suffering, then you got no problem with desire, and you're probably pretty happy doing what you're doing. So that an insight regarding suffering and desire's role in the production and perpetuation of suffering is central, is fundamental. Then from right view to right intention, and I like our book's use of right intention, it is the capacity to maintain right view beyond that moment of insight. So right intention, think about intention as kind of like having that inner keel, that moral compass after the moment of insight that keeps you seeing well enough, you are wise enough that you could continue into further study and you're not being distracted left, right, and center, So on the chart there we see it says understanding and thoughts, but I'm trying to stick with the wording from the book, which is right view is number one, right intention is number two. Go into morality. Now, what we find out about this version of morality, unlike maybe, let's say, compare it to the Ten Commandments, that this morality begins with a philosophy of language, moves into an ethics, and concludes with a philosophy of economy. So that's a pretty interesting approach to it all, to say we'll start with a philosophy of language, then we're going to move into your ethics, and then we've got a philosophy of economy that undergirds our morality. So the first one here is right speech. That this comes first tells us how profoundly the Buddha understood the role of language in human consciousness. Let me pull this up. I'm hoping this helps you see it. Right? So potty mouth is not on the path. And from our book, this recognize that you recognize the harm negative words do to oneself as well as to others. Now, it's very interesting to think that his first thought is quit talking, quit yammering, no backstabbing, no, that literally your tongue and your language is constitutive of your religious insight. So after right speech, then we go into right action. Desisting from all kinds of behavior that is injurious to others. Now that's about where the Ten Commandments lies. And then right livelihood. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that you actually have to think about, oh, dang it, I've made such good money exploiting people over in faraway places who I don't have to pay anything for. And yet it troubles me, right? That economy is actually central to your capacity to live your religious life. All right, it's getting cold in Wyoming. You can hear the heat kicking in. Next, the final, the final leg, concentration. Now, when was the last time you had a good sit-down talk or were trained in concentration? Some of you might be reading mindfulness literature. Some of you might be athletes where concentration is central to your work. Some of you might have rituals that help you get your homework done. Some of you might have religious practices where you are able to get yourself into a point of concentration. So there is an epistemology built into the Eightfold Path. An epistemology is the process of studying how we know what we know. And this epistemology has two prongs. The first is reflexivity, because the Buddha understood that in those desires are many illusory, false perceptions. And unless you get behind those perceptions, a famous Buddhist idea is that 98% of what you see is actually behind your eyeballs. So it builds this reflexive question that says you got to ask yourself, how do you know what you know? How are you certain of your knowledge? And the second prong of this epistemology is awareness of one's body as central to the project of understanding what am I seeing. And this is as simple as don't go shopping when you're hungry, right? So if you are aware of your body, you know that you will be seeing things differently. And if you are trying to avoid problematic behaviors like overeating or buying the wrong food, then your awareness of your body means I shop after I've eaten a whole plate of zucchini. Right? So, oh, there I go again with it. Misspelling. There we are. Okay. Now, divided into three. First, right effort. You have to be able to ward off delusory or entrapping thoughts. Anybody out there ever spun on an old argument that you really should have won? Anybody have default narratives at work in their work or love relationships in which you find yourself spinning in unhappiness? So right effort means that you have the capacity to ward off. It's not that you're not going to have them. He understands how delusory and entrapping thought is, but you develop the capacity to ward those off rather than spin in them. So that's the warding off is right effort. Right mindfulness then, and there's quite a science of this developing across the states right now in education, business, health and healing. So the continuous awareness of your bodily states, sensations, emotions, in order to control yourself from slipping into extremes. And the happiness hypothesis, imagine, all this new cognitive science is letting us know how the brain tips us into modes of thought, that the elephant is driving the bus. We're not driving the elephant. And so here we were, long time ago, thinking, unless you are aware of the bodily states, the body influences what the mind sees, and then finally, through that process, might one arrive at the capacity for single-minded concentration. So I hope this little overview of the Eightfold Path is useful to you, and that you can leave this course with a bit of a grasp on what Buddhism offers. All right, thanks.